of our graduates. They have truly advanced in knowledge and wisdom during their time with us, and we honor their accomplishments, we salute their sacrifices, and we praise their dedication. We thank you for their mentors, their families, and all those who have supported them. We ask you, Lord, to fill their hearts with joy and hope and gratitude at this commencement. As they receive their diplomas today, give them a deep desire to share their gifts with a world hungry for truth, hungry for beauty, hungry for goodness. Amen. Would you please be seated?
3 women to be selected by NASA as a pilot astronaut. She's proof that determination, self-confidence, and a willingness to learn are the most important factors in achieving your dreams. As we celebrate with our graduates today, it's important for us to remember that Colonel Melroy, who grew up in Rochester, faced many of the same questions that you are now facing. What to do with your life, how to channel your interests and your passions into a life that is fulfilling and benefits society. We could do worse than look to Colonel Melroy as an example of how to answer those questions. She shows us that there is no limit to what we can achieve if we just hold fast to our dreams. It's now my great pleasure to present Lieutenant Colonel Pamela Melroy.
For Katie. It's been 18 years, but the student commencement speaker at my graduation was Lynn Jordahl, and she is now a producer for CBS News in New York. So I have high hopes that the rest of your classmates will also remember you. I have to thank you so much for inviting me here. It's such a pleasure to share this moment of success with you. By anyone's standard, what you have achieved is a testament to who you are and what you can accomplish. Now, I use that term standard with a thought in mind. It reminds me of an old story about a mother and her son. The mother was so happy when her bouncing, healthy, happy baby boy was born. She watched him grow and develop, sitting up, standing, finally walking, and even learning how to feed himself. But there was one thing that bothered her. He never spoke. She discussed it with her husband. She took him to a doctor. She took him for tests and to speech therapists, but still he never said a word. He was normal in every other way, and eventually she decided not to worry about it anymore. One morning she was running late and had several distractions as she was preparing breakfast for him. Suddenly he said, "Mom, you burned the toast." Stunned, she stopped everything, looked at him and said, "What? Why haven't you spoken before this?" And he said, "Well, before this, everything was pretty much all right." Well, it's a funny story, but part of the reason why it's funny is that we don't really expect kids to have very high standards. An ice cream cone, a hug, and you pretty much made a 5-year-old happy. As we get older, our standards get a little more complex. You're talking about Nintendo, the latest special effects in a movie, a date to the prom, an A on your test, or all of the above. Now, as a child and as a student, you have parents, teachers, friends, and even the media who have set many of these standards for you. Over the last few years, you've had to meet a lot of high standards, both academically and socially here at Nazareth. This has prepared you to broaden your mind to a more complex set of criteria for your standards. You may have heard about a recent study that showed that people who were not very competent at a task were generally a pretty poor judge of whether they were good at it or not. The people who were competent tended to have higher standards and had a more realistic assessment of their own performance. What your education in Nazareth has given you is the ability to set good standards in life by yourself, for yourself. This is an incredibly rewarding capability, and you should nurture it and continue to develop it. When you leave the academic world of grades, there's a lot less feedback out there on how well you have done something. There may not be a right answer that's going to give you an A, or there may be several. The cues for how you're doing are much more subtle, and they can be very subjective based on the situation and on the perceptions and the standards of those around you. The space program has many stories of heroes who spoke up against prevailing engineering wisdom of the time. What about the guy who first proposed the slingshot orbit around the moon? It sounded incredibly bold. I mean, common knowledge knew that if you were going to try to get higher in altitude, you used each successive flight to very gradually increase your altitude. But because of orbital mechanics, which not very many people understood at the time, the simplest and most fuel-efficient way to go to the moon was to go all for it and swing around and come the other side and come home. Now that guy could have been fired, but fortunately for us, he eventually persuaded his boss, and we went on to the moon in exactly the way that he had suggested. I have another story about a personal friend, Mr. John Kiker. You've never heard his name, but he's the man who first thought up the idea of transporting the shuttle on the back of a Boeing 747. This was way back when the shuttle was just a gleam in some engineer's eye. You see, the shuttle has rocket engines that are intended to get you into space, but no engines for flying itself around in the atmosphere. So it's the world's biggest glider for landing. Well, it was planned to land from space at Edwards Air Force Base in California, and then somehow it had to get back to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida for launch. Well, how are they going to get it across country? The traditional idea was to have special engines that you could strap onto it. Some people thought that you had to build those special atmospheric engines into it, but this would have greatly increased the weight of the shuttle and reduced the amount of cargo that it could lift to space. If those people had won, we would not have had the capability to be building the International Space Station the way we are today. But my friend John Kiker was a big model plane enthusiast. He built a scale model of the shuttle and a scale model of the Boeing 747, attached them, and proved aerodynamically that it would work to ferry the shuttle strapped to the back of this enormous aircraft. His boss thought he was a crackpot. Fortunately, he had a friend up at NASA headquarters. He slipped a copy of the proposal to the friend, who brought it to other engineers who scratched their heads. Try as they might, they couldn't find a reason why it wouldn't work, and a lot of reasons why it was a great solution. Word came down to Houston from Washington, give it a go. And when the rest of the engineering community in Houston had a chance to look at it, the idea took off and became commonly accepted. Years later, when I was a test pilot at Edwards, I watched the incredible sight of these two enormous vehicles mated together, lifting off into the dawn. My eyes told me that it couldn't fly, but it had been flying like that for years. And on my very own shuttle mission, STS-92, we landed at Edwards and later saw our shuttle Discovery strapped to the back of a Boeing 747. And all because one person looked inside himself for what was good and what would work. You will also find in your careers that many seemingly unrelated factors can play into others' assessment of your performance. You can get an award, or you can get fired. And while it will almost always reflect at least some aspect of your performance, sometimes it's just because you're in the right place at the right time, or the wrong place at the wrong time. If you blindly believe it was always because you deserved it, that can be a real problem. Having your own internal set of
certifying that they have fulfilled all the requirements for these degrees and recommend that these degrees be conferred upon them.
By virtue of the power vested in me by the Regents of the University of the State of New York and by the trustees of Nazareth College of Rochester, I confer upon these candidates the degree Bachelor of Science for all the rights and privileges thereto appertaining.
The Bachelor of Science degree is awarded cum laude to students who have earned a cumulative quality point index of 3.5 or higher, and magna cum laude to students who have earned a cumulative quality point index of 3.75 or higher. Again, we shall recognize students who are graduates of the Nazareth College Honors Program. These students have completed 2 honors seminars and a senior honors thesis. please hold your applause until the entire group has received degrees.